When we hear the word dream, I think a lot of us picture something soft, you know.
Right, like a wish or something.
Exactly, like a wish just floating around in the clouds.
Yeah.
But then you look at history and you realize that the most powerful dreams, the ones that actually change the world, they're entirely forceful.
Oh, yeah. They are heavy.
They demand absolutely everything from the people who hold them. And today, we are doing a deep dive into two really powerful sources from creator Emanoel Ceress. First, his travel vlog exploring the historic cradle of the U.S. Civil Rights Movement in Atlanta, Georgia. And second, this deeply personal account of his wildly unlikely journey, like going from extreme poverty in Brazil to actually becoming an interpreter for the United Nations.
And our mission for this deep dive is to explore that exact mechanism. We want to understand the profound intersection between, monumental historical legacies and localized, against all odds, individual triumph.
Yeah, the architecture of those two things is remarkably similar.
Exactly. We are going to look at how the massive world-shifting dreams of history's giants kind of echo into the everyday perseverance of individuals, the people who just decide to chase the impossible.
So let's start with the historical weight, because the first source drops us right into the center of it. Emanoel travels to Atlanta, Georgia, specifically to the Sweet Auburn Historic District.
Right.
And this is essentially hallowed ground for the American Civil Rights Movement. He visits the birth home of Martin Luther King Jr., and he spends time around Ebenezer Baptist Church, where Dr. King preached.
Yeah.
And the way Emanoel describes this isn't just like as a tourist checking off a list. He talks about how you can literally breathe in Black history in that space. The preservation of that district serves as a physical anchor for a movement that, well, reshaped the globe.
What's fascinating here is how the source captures the atmosphere of systemic confrontation. I mean, he is walking the streets where one of the most significant social transformations in modern history was basically incubated. The U.S. Civil Rights Movement was about dismantling massive, entrenched, institutionalized barriers, right? Legal segregation, historic oppression. And a specific detail Emanoel highlights at the King Center is a monument featuring an eternal flame.
Yes, the eternal flame.
Right next to that flame is a motto. It says, "The dream lives and the legacy continues."
Okay, let's unpack this. Because watching a Brazilian man stand in front of a monument to the American Civil Rights Movement and deeply internalize that specific phrase, the dream lives and the legacy continues, it really forces us to ask how these monumental concepts cross international borders. Like, how does breathing in the history of Black resistance in the United States trigger a reflection on an entirely different set of barriers thousands of miles away?
Well, I think it translates because the underlying mechanics of overcoming seemingly insurmountable odds, they're universal.
Right.
When Emanoel looks at that eternal flame, he isn't just looking at American history. He is looking at the ultimate proof of concept that environmental constraints can be outmuscled.
Which is a perfect way to put it. And that brings us to the stark contrast of Emanoel's own origins. He grew up in an impoverished community called Nain, located in Olinda, Brazil.
Yeah.
And the sources make it very clear this wasn't just like a tight budget, you know. This was a severe systemic lack of resources. His mother worked endlessly as a domestic worker just to provide the absolute bare minimum for survival.
Yeah. Poverty creates what behavioral economists call a bandwidth tax.
Oh, it's a great term.
Right. If your brain is constantly dedicating all its processing power to immediate survival, so food, shelter, safety, there is biologically very little cognitive bandwidth left for abstract, long-term aspiration.
Right. You're just trying to get through the day.
Exactly. So the fact that a 6-year-old Emanoel hears someone singing a random song in English and suddenly develops an obsession with understanding those foreign sounds, it feels like a cognitive anomaly.
It really does. Where does a kid in those circumstances even find the bandwidth to care about English syntax?
Well, that is the core mystery of intrinsic motivation. In an environment engineered to keep a person's gaze fixed on the dirt right in front of them, this 6-year-old boy somehow fixes his gaze on a horizon he can't even see.
Wow.
It's an intellectual awakening that completely defies his environmental programming. And the source notes that this wasn't just a passing phase either.
No, not at all.
Even at age 25, his fixation on learning English was so intense that people in his community started lending him old, worn-out cassette tapes just so he could study.
And I want you listening right now to really think about the mechanics of that.
Yeah.
We usually hear these stories and use analogies like, oh, it's a seed growing through concrete.
Yeah, we hear that a lot.
But that doesn't actually explain the work involved, does it?
Mm.
Emmanuel's learning process was more like trying to reverse engineer the lock on a bank vault using a cheap stethoscope.
Oh, wow. That is,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, he didn't have textbooks or tutors. He had borrowed cassette tapes. He is sitting there, rewinding, listening to the microscopic clicks of syntax,
Mm.
pausing, trying to mimic the phonetic sounds without any formal understanding of the grammatical rules. And he's repeating that agonizing process for years.
That vault metaphor is highly accurate. He was manually decoding a language system.
Yeah.
And when we connect that localized, solitary effort in Olinda back to his blog in Atlanta at MLK's birth home, we see the resonance of the dream. Dr. King's dream was about dismantling massive legal walls. Emmanuel's journey required that same fundamental refusal to accept the socio-economic boundaries placed around him.
He took the conceptual blueprint of a dream and applied it to his own vault.
Precisely. Proving that human determination can bend reality if applied with enough pressure over time.
So he applies that pressure, he cracks the initial vault, and he actually manages to pass the vestibular, which is the notoriously brutal university entrance exam in Brazil.
Right, a huge accomplishment.
Massive. He secures a spot at the Universidade Federal Rural to study chemistry. But here's where the narrative and the sources genuinely confuse me.
Oh.
Yeah, because escaping extreme poverty programs, a person to prioritize security above all else, chemistry is a hard science.
Yeah.
Comes with a clear, concrete career path and a stable paycheck.
Right. It's safe.
So why on earth would someone in his position abandon a guaranteed lifeline like a chemistry degree for something as abstract and notoriously underpaid as literature and languages? Doesn't that seem incredibly risky?
I mean, from a purely pragmatic survivalist standpoint, it looks like a catastrophic gamble.
Totally.
But this is the critical inflection point in Emmanuel's life. He realized very quickly that chemistry was merely a survival mechanism, not his actual calling. He made the massive pivot to study Letras languages and literature focusing specifically on Portuguese and English.
Wow.
He wasn't just chasing a job anymore. He was formalizing the obsession that started with that cassette tape.
But how does a pivot like that actually work in practice? Like, did he just switch his major and hope for the best, or was there a specific methodology to how he tackled literature?
Well, the sources indicate it was a relentless, highly structured immersion. He didn't just casually learn conversational English, he specialized in English teaching.
Okay.
He started diving deep into American literature and European literature. He was studying the cultural frameworks, the historical context, like the very bones of how the English-speaking world communicates its ideas.
So he's building an incredibly robust intellectual foundation.
Exactly. And then he added a layer of meta-analysis by taking a distance learning course via Harvard University.
Okay, yeah, I saw the notes on this Harvard course in our research, and the topic was listed as family or family engagement in education.
Right.
But what does that actually look like? Because when I hear family engagement, I just picture, parents helping their kids with math homework at the kitchen table.
I get that, but if we connect this to the bigger picture, family is actually a complex sociological concept. It isn't just about homework.
Oh, really?
No, it's about integrating a family's cultural context, their localized knowledge, and their community resources directly into the educational curriculum.
Okay.
It's about building a scaffolding around the student so that learning isn't an isolated event happening only in a classroom, but a shared community enterprise.
Which is something Emmanuel fundamentally lacked.
Precisely. His mother was working day and night. She didn't have the time, the English proficiency, or the resources to provide that scaffolding.
Right.
Emmanuel realized through this Harvard course that he had been forced to build his own scaffolding from scratch. This course gave him the academic vocabulary to understand exactly what he had survived.
That is so profound.
It really is. He was no longer just learning a language. He was studying the actual structural mechanics of how education transforms marginalized communities.
So he is basically studying the engineering blueprints of the ladder he is actively climbing.
That's a great way to put it.
That is brilliant. It completely changes the framing of his pivot from chemistry. He wasn't retreating into abstract literature. He was gathering the exact tools needed to dismantle the specific barriers of his past.
Exactly.
But eventually, you have to take those tools into the real world. You have to enter the job market.
And the transition into the job market is where abstract preparation collides with harsh economic realities. Emmanuel needed to generate income.
Yeah, bills have to be paid.
Right. So he started out taking on internships, just trying to get a foothold in the professional world. And then, according to his account, a highly serendipitous sequence of events unfolded.
Right. The sources say a friend pointed him toward a website for a selection process at the Colégio Militar do Recife, which is part of the Brazilian Army's military school system.
Hmm.
And amazingly, this particular selection process happened to be exclusively for English teachers. Emmanuel describes this moment as feeling like the universe was aligning, like he was meant for this specific mission. But honestly, that sounds a bit too clean to me. Wait, I'm genuinely confused here. Why is a Brazilian military school holding an exclusive, highly competitive selection process just for English teachers? That feels like a very specific, weird gap for an army to prioritize.
I know it sounds niche, but it makes perfect sense when you understand the function of the Collegio Militar system in Brazil.
Okay, tell me more.
These aren't just basic training camps. They are elite, high-level educational institutions. The Brazilian military regularly participates in international joint operations and global peacekeeping missions, which require a high degree of English fluency.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, and they also prepare their students for top-tier universities. So they need world-class language instructors to maintain that operational readiness. The gap was specific, but it was highly strategic.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me then, because it completely changes the universe aligning narrative. Let's look at the actual mechanics of this so-called luck. Emmanuel spent decades forging a hyper-specific, highly complex key. He spent his childhood obsessing over a song, his 20s reverse engineering syntax from cassettes, terrifyingly pivoting away from a safe science degree,
Yeah.
deeply analyzing American literature, and taking Harvard courses on educational scaffolding. He is filing down the teeth of this key with agonizing precision for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
So when his friend points out the job posting, it's not magic. He just happened to finally stand in front of the exact solitary door that required the hyper-specific key he had already built.
That is the essential takeaway. We have to dismantle the idea of pure luck. Yes, a friend sharing a link is serendipitous. The timing of an exclusive call for English teachers is fortunate.
Sure.
But none of that matters if the infrastructure isn't there to capitalize on the random event. The selection test for the Collegium Militar was notoriously rigorous.
Right.
If Emmanuel had prioritized the safety of chemistry, or if he had only learned casual conversational English without the deep literary and pedagogical foundation, he fails that test. The luck was merely the invitation. His decades of unseen, grueling preparation were what actually unlocked the door.
So he passes the complex exam, he gets the job, he secures his footing in a highly respected institution,
Yeah.
but the Collegio Militar was just the launch pad. The preparation he put in was about to unlock a door far heavier than a teaching gig. This brings us to the ultimate realization of his dream, taking him from Olinda onto the global stage.
Yes, because after 2 years of working as a teacher within the military school system, Emmanuel's proficiency and background led to an extraordinary deployment.
Wow.
He was invited to serve as an interpreter for a United Nations mission.
Unreal.
He was sent to Haiti exactly 1 year after the devastating 2010 earthquake that shattered the country's infrastructure.
Okay, let's examine the mechanics of what he's actually doing in Haiti. Because interpreting in a post-earthquake crisis zone isn't just swapping vocabulary words from Portuguese to English.
Not at all.
You are operating in a high-stress, emotionally volatile environment where miscommunications can literally impact survival and resource distribution.
Yeah.
You are facilitating coordination between the Brazilian military, international UN officials, and local populations.
It requires an immense cognitive and emotional load, and this is where we see the synthesis of everything Emmanuel studied.
Right.
The deep dives into literature gave him the ability to parse nuance, tone, and human emotion. The Harvard Family course gave him an acute understanding of how traumatized, marginalized communities function and learn amidst systemic failure.
Wow. Yeah.
He wasn't just translating words, he was acting as a cultural and emotional bridge in a disaster zone. He was utilizing the meta skills he acquired while trying to save himself in Olinda to help stabilize an international crisis.
So what does this all mean for you, our listener? Emmanuel looks back at this trajectory, and his ultimate message to his audience is, if I can do it, you can too. You can learn and communicate with the world, which is a beautiful sentiment. But let's be real. Sometimes hearing about a guy who went from poverty to the UN can feel alienating.
It can be overwhelming.
Right, because you might be looking at your own goals, a career pivot, a new skill, navigating a complex project, and the gap between where you are and where you want to be feels paralyzing.
Yeah.
How do we extract a practical application from Emmanuel's life without just resorting to, work harder?
This raises an important question about how we contextualize ambition. The practical application is to stop focusing on the UN mission and start focusing on the cassette tape.
Well, I like that.
If we loop this entire journey back to our first source, Emmanuel, walking through the historic Sweet Auburn district in Atlanta, we find the answer. Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream was a massive global vision of equality.
Hmm.
But the actual work of the civil rights movement wasn't abstract. It was the granular, grueling, terrifying daily logistics of organizing boycotts, mapping out marches, and enduring hostility. It was built piece by piece.
Yeah.
Emmanuel didn't try to leap from the impoverished streets of Nana straight to a UN helicopter. He focused on reverse engineering one English song.
Yeah.
Then he focused on the university exam. Then he focused on understanding pedagogical scaffolding.
He just kept filing the teeth on the key, even when he didn't know where the door was.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
He broke the impossible down into manageable, daily, cognitive tasks. And when we look at his international act of service in Haiti and we hold it up against the eternal flame at MLK's church, we see the true resonance of the motto. The dream lives and the legacy continues.
Wow.
The legacy of the civil rights movement was about using one's acquired voice to secure human dignity and bridge divides. Emmanuel took his individual triumph over localized poverty and turned his acquired voice into an instrument of global service. He is the living embodiment of that historical echo.
That reframes the entire concept of historical legacy. It's not just statues and plaques, it's the active, daily application of perseverance. Let's take a step back and look at the whole board here.
Yeah, let's do it.
We started by walking the preserved streets of Atlanta, breathing in the heavy, forceful reality of the American Civil Rights Movement, and standing before an eternal flame that demands the continuation of a dream.
Mm-hmm.
We then tracked that same frequency of perseverance down to Olinda, Brazil, where the bandwidth tax of poverty couldn't stop a 6-year-old from obsessing over the syntax of a foreign song.
And we examined the vital difference between seeking survival and pursuing a calling. We tracked his pivot away from the safety of chemistry into the deep structural study of languages and community education.
Right.
We dismantled the myth of pure serendipity, revealing how decades of unseen intellectual infrastructure allowed him to capitalize on a single job posting at an elite military college. And we saw all of those compounding skills synthesized in the rubble of Haiti, where he served as a UN interpreter in a high-stakes crisis zone.
It is an absolute masterclass in building your own scaffolding. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought. Throughout this whole discussion, we've treated Emmanuel's acquisition of English as a highly complex tool.
Right.
And normally, that's how we view learning a language, as a neat little bullet point to add to a resume, or a convenient way to order coffee when we travel. But looking at the sheer physics of Emmanuel's life, that definition feels entirely insufficient. Maybe it is far more accurate to view language as a literal form of teleportation.
I love that. It is a completely invisible skill. It weighs nothing. You cannot hold it in your hands. And yet it possesses the kinetic energy to completely alter your physical reality.
Yeah.
It picked Emmanuel up from a marginalized, resource-starved neighborhood in Brazil, bypassed all the socioeconomic borders specifically designed to keep him there, and dropped him directly into the center of a United Nations mission on the world stage. It bent space and time for him.
Language teleported him. So the question I want to leave you with today is this. What invisible skill are you currently ignoring or putting off simply because you can't immediately see the door it opens? Think about your own cassette tapes.
Yeah.
What is the hyper-specific key you need to start forging right now so that when the universe randomly presents an opportunity, you have the infrastructure to unlock it? Find that skill, start filing the key, and see where it transports you. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the mechanics of the world around you, and we will catch you next time.